But Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta will be in Parliament on Wednesday, November 17, to present the government's economic policy and budget statement for the 2022 fiscal year. His focus will be to deal with the high government expenditure on salaries and interest payments, which takes more than 53% of government's expenditure. The budget deficit, however, is expected to widen from 38 billion in 2021 to close to 40 billion Ghana cedis in 2022. Well, we'll be talking about how organized labor see this whole thing. But let's look at how the 2020 budget will be looking when the finance minister goes to Parliament. So the budget will actually focus on revitalization, transforming the economy through digitization, industrialization, competitive import substitution, export expansion, and the creation of decent jobs, particularly for the youth. Now, look at how the projected revenue is looking versus the expenditure. And remember, there's been talks about the high government expenditure, which needs to be cut down if we need to work on our economy. So the projected expenditure is 128.3 billion. Okay, that is what will happen in the 2022 budget. Projected revenue at 89.1 billion Ghana cedis, and the deficit will be at 39.2 billion cedis. Now, if you look at a comparative analysis of 2021 and 2022 budgets, you will see that in 2021, it stood at what? 113.8 billion. That was the expenditure for 2021. If you look at 2022, it is projected to go up to 128.3 billion cedis for the 2022 year. And then that was expenditure for you. Now look at revenue, 2021 and 2022. And you have, for 2021, revenue was generated at 72.5 billion cedis. Now, 2022 is projected to generate 89.1 billion cedis. And the question is, will the revenue match the expenditure? Now, if you look at the interest payments and compensation of employees, those are the projected amounts to be spent on these two areas. And you can see 37.1 billion cedis, representing 27.9% of the total expenditure. That's why I asked the question whether expenditure and revenue is matching. Now you're seeing that 27.9% of the revenue that will be generated, interest payments only will take 27.9% of the total expenditure. Now, if you look at the compensation of employees, it will take 35.9 billion cedis, which stands at 28.9% of the total expenditure. So the projected amount to be spent actually on interest payments and compensation alone will represent 91% of what government seeks to raise as revenue in 2022. And this is where the conversation is hanging around. That is where the argument has been. Now, organized labor says it is looking ahead to the budget as well, but have warned that government to look elsewhere for solutions, because they say they don't really care about expenditure and revenue and what have you. They still want more. Listen to Angel Carbono, who is president of NAGRAT, one of the groups demanding more pay.
The government should identify where the monies that culminated in the deficit go. Certainly, that amount of money cannot be said to come to emolument, salaries and compensation of workers. Absolutely not. Because I can tell you that over 80% of public sector workers in Ghana receive less than 1,500 Ghana cedis a month. 1,500 cedis a month. Something we all know is woefully inadequate and very unacceptable. So it certainly is not on salaries and emolument. It is going elsewhere that ought to be plugged, a loophole that ought to be plugged.
Well, you seem to be saying that the politicians are spending the money elsewhere or on themselves. What exactly is it that you know?
Well, look at the salary of Article 71 office holders. Look at their salaries. Look at their allowances. Look at their pay.
What about it? Is it too high?
Well, in relation to what the other public sector workers earn, it is very high. Some other ventures, when you go around this country, projects are littered all over the country. That is turned into white elephants. These are some of the places where the shortages come from.
So two things, the projects that have not been completed and are therefore not in use, and then compensation to the president and his appointees.
Yes.
Would you say they have to cut their salaries to make up for the deficit?
Well, they should trim the numbers in the first place. When you look at the number of people employed in the presidency, when you look at the number of people hanging on as political appointees, when you look at money spent at political party functions, all these monies fall within the general Ghana KP money. The money is not coming from elsewhere. It's also part of Ghana money. Projects that are engaged in to satisfy people not because of its economic value. So the fighting of housing schemes littered all over this country. When workers are looking for places to lay their heads, those housing schemes have not been completed, and then we are losing money on a daily basis.
But how do you add expenditure on political party activities to government expenditure?
Have you realized the interesting thing that the party program of the political party in power surges up when they are in power and looks very, very pauperized when they are in opposition? Where do you think all those monies are coming from?
Tell me.
Those monies are all coming from the state. How come the same amount of money is not mobilized when the party is in opposition?
You are effectively saying they are siphoning state funds to satisfy their political party needs.
That is my highest suspicion. Our salaries are woefully inadequate. And if the compensation is to reduce the deficit, salaries and compensation should not be one of the factors to look at, because salaries and compensations are already very low in this country.
Well, this afternoon, we're focusing on how government can resolve the deficit dilemma. And joining me for this conversation via Zoom is Professor Lord Mensah. He's an associate professor with the Department of Finance at the University of Ghana Business School, Legon. Prof, I'm grateful for your time. This is not the first time we're expressing worry over government's high expenditure. Now we're being told that the budget deficit will now jump from 38 billion to 40 billion cedis. How should we take this news, first of all?
Yeah, if you look at last year's budget, I mean, clearly you could see that the government's appetite for borrowing keeps on growing every now and then. And obviously, if you create a huge budget deficit, you may have to finance it. And the problem with our budget is that with the expenditure side that we have control, we are not able to manage it very well, because I split the expenditure side into two, which we have the discretionary and then the non-discretionary expenditure, lines. And the discretionary ones, I think we should be able to control these ones. The ones that are non-discretionary, like the interest payment and salary, it's non-negotiable. Those ones, I think, when you project into the year, and the realities are not that much different. But the ones that causes problem is the non-discretionary ones, and those ones are ones that I think we should be able to find a way to control them. The discretionary ones. Those ones are the ones that we should be able to control. And indeed, if you want to construct 10-kilometer road, and you are tied up in terms of your debt levels and all those, you don't want to borrow more, you reduce it. And so for me, raising that kind of budget deficit sometimes calls for unnecessary hopes, which normally we are not able to meet. And if you owe as a country, obviously that is not when you tend to be aggressive, because if you increase your budget deficit, it means that you are adopting that aggressive posture in economic management. And, aggressive posture in economic management You only take that when you foresee a future growth, when you foresee a serious economic expansion. But that is not the case at this time. We just came out from COVID. And trust me, globally, every country is now picking up in terms of business activities. So if you come out with a huge budget deficit, then I don't know the kind of economic management you intend to go into in the next coming year. So for me, it's not a good signal. I mean, it's about time the government toned down on the aggressive, posture that they've been posing all these years. Let's come to the reality and see exactly what is happening. I mean, everybody that owes, if you come to your own homes and if you owe, that is not when you start putting up more buildings. You rather tone down some of these expenditures and then ensure that the basics that can keep you afloat, you keep them going until things get better. But as it stands now, that is not what we see in the current management.
Now, the people who say that this adjustment is not something that would come easy for government to actually adapt or take. But for you, what should be the strategy in bridging the gap? So, because the argument now is between borrowing and cutting down expenditure. How can government actually put itself in this shoe and decide to cut expenditure like you're suggesting?
Well, you see, I've been drumming on this expenditure cut for some years now. And I realize that politically, it may not be wise to do that. But economically, it would be wise. Because if you're going to borrow and you're going to borrow at a higher interest rate, remember, the approach of the United States, which serves as a safe haven for investment, they're now going to the tight monetary policy trajectory where they're going to increase their rate. And by so doing, any investor that is, that intends to invest in a sovereign bond would like to invest in the U.S. market. Remember, even in our local market, the market is dominated by foreigners. So effectively, they will tend to look at the United States market more better, which is more or less a secure market compared to our market. So borrowing in that regard is going to attract more interest or more coupon payment to the investor. And looking at our economic indicators, which has not been, favorable all these years, obviously the investor will not have that confidence to send money here at a lower cost. And so the best you can do, which you have control over, is to reduce your expenditure. And as I said, the expenditure we have ones that you have control over and the ones that you don't have control over. If you take expenditure lines like capital expenditure, goods and services, grant to other agencies and all those, these are some things that you can easily, look into and then plug in some leakages. And over that side of expenditure, I would have loved to spend only when, let me emphasize on this, only when, that expenditure is able to generate direct revenue. That is when I will put in something. But if the expenditure will not likely to generate, direct revenue, let me put it one-to-one, I may not put in money in that direction. So that would be where we rationalize our expenditure in that case. And effectively, that should be able to help us one way or the other. Until things get better, we cannot continue to position ourselves aggressively as if we have a very good future. Therefore, let's spend into it. That is not the case.
Professor Lord Mensah, I'm extremely grateful for your time this afternoon. He's an associate professor of finance at the University Business School, University of Ghana Business School.